You're listening to episode 130 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Professional storyteller and juggler Izzi Tooinsky speaks with us about a new Buddhist-themed CD, Stories from a Wooden Bowl. We've had some very cerebral discussions on the podcast lately, so I thought it would be a good time for us to get more in touch with another aspect of being human, art, specifically the art of storytelling, and in a Buddhist context. So much of our understanding of our culture is derived from our stories, the narratives of our lives, and in this age of digital technological advances, we're connecting less and less with the experience of immersion in the story, and how wonderful that can be. Fortunately, there are still people dedicated to keeping this art form alive, who share their talent and passion for communicating the narratives of living. Award-winning juggler and storyteller Izzi Tooinsky got his BA in International Relations from United States International University in San Diego, California. He has written 2 books, The Turkey Prince and Juggling Without Struggling. Izzi performs at storytelling and other festivals all over the world, and has been on television's Good Morning America and Good Morning Australia, and is a motivational speaker presenting his message of standing in between a miracle and a mess to corporate groups, festivals, and schools. So sit back, relax, and have a nice old-time lemonade. And our guest today is Izzi Tooinsky. Izzi, thank you very much for being here.
It's a great pleasure.
I'm very glad to have you, and one of the first questions I want to ask is, how do I get a cool name like Izzi Tooinsky? Because that's awesome. I like that very much.
How do you get that name?
Yeah, I want a name like that.
you have to have really cool parents, I think.
Yeah, I think he had really cool parents. That's got to be it. Izzi, talk to us about your background before we go into Wooden Bowl Buddhist stories. Tell us about your background with art and performance and Buddhism and all of that.
Sure. Well, let's see. Let's start with art. Art is my, well, let me say it like this. I'm a juggler by trade and a storyteller. And as far as I know, there's only 7 jugglers and storytellers in the entire world. Actually, people that are actually making a living at it. It's an ancient mixture, but at this time, it's really come down to a few nuts and kernels, and I'm one of them. So what I do is I mix juggling, and with juggling, you always have to have some way to present it. If you just stand there and juggle, it's nice for a moment or two, but you really can't hold the attention of people for that long. So you have to have either jokes or music, and my way was stories. So I started as I started basically as a street performer, and I told stories, funny stories, fast stories, while I was juggling, and then that went into beginning to do festivals and evolved into I've kind of straddled these 2 strange worlds of juggling and storytelling, going and performing at sometimes juggling conventions, which we have the International Juggling Convention every year, and I've gone to many of them, and I also have had the great honor of performing at the greatest storytelling festival in the world, which is in Jonesboro, Tennessee, at the International Storytelling Center. They get 12,000 people every year, around 12,000, to come and listen to their chosen storytellers, and I've been picked 3 times to tell there.
Wonderful, wonderful. What an exciting background. Tell us more about then your mixture of these 2 disciplines in performance art. In art is that you're a juggler, and that in itself is its own discipline, and of course very hard to make a living at doing, and combining with storytelling, which is a really, I don't think people understand, it's not just reading a story. There's so much more to storytelling than that. Why don't you focus for a few minutes on that, because storytelling itself as an art form is enormously complex.
Sure. Well, storytelling, I think, is probably the human's most basic, maybe our first great art form, partly because it's so light. Light meaning that you can carry it wherever you go, and wherever you go, you can learn stories. Like right now you're learning a story from me, and just before we got onto air, I was learning a story from you. So the exchange is so dynamic and so accessible. The exchange of stories. If we had some other art form, almost any other art form, cooking, for instance, we like to cook, but to learn cooking actually takes a little bit of time. You'd have to have certain materials with you and certain things to cook it on and a certain thing to cook it with. But if you had a story, a story could be learned by prisoners on death row, waiting in a cell, or it could be learned by a prince in a golden palace sitting on a peacock throne, and it's exactly the same story. It's that light and it's that accessible, and everybody, like I said, everybody has stories. And one problem, I think, with our modern culture is that we don't honor our stories. For instance, I've had so many parents say to me, I'd like to tell my kids stories, or my grandchildren stories, but I don't have any. But the things that kids love to hear, they love to hear, what did your mom do when she got mad at you? For instance, my dad, he told me his mom used to tie him to the bed with his brother. She would tie their legs to the leg of the bed, and so they couldn't go out and run, but they always carried a little ball with them so they could play ball while she was punishing them.
Wow, years of expensive therapy in that punishment.
That's right. That's right. So everybody's got stories that are rich, that are funny, that are interesting, that are deep, or that are light, that we can share, and that children, especially children and friends, and family members, they want to hear those stories, but because we don't honor them, we don't work on them. By work on them, I mean just give them consciousness and intention. We don't work on it in that sense, and so we don't share them. And so we've kind of given over our entertainment to television, to movies, to videos, and to computers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you bring up some very good points about stories really are at their heart about communication, about experience. And one of the things that we have on our Secular Buddhist Association site, lines on the guiding principle that talk about valuing the stories that we have. And it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily take them as a literal truth, but we can learn from them because they are conveying an important message to us that may contribute to our overall lives. And so thank you for continuing that tradition of storytelling. Tell us a bit about, the one we're talking about today is the new CD, Wooden Bowl Buddhist Stories. It's stories from a wooden bowl, traditional Buddhist stories from around the world. And tell us a little bit about how you got into this. Did you have a background in Buddhism, or how did this come to you to work on this project?
Well, I've been sitting at a Zendo. It's called Ring of Bone Zendo. We are in North San Juan, California. Very, very rural Zendo, and but very, very dedicated. So I've been sitting there for a number of years, and honestly, I feel just a tremendous amount of gratitude for Zendo, for the teacher, for my, the Sangha, and I don't have a lot to give. I don't have, in the sense of I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of carpentry skills necessarily, but what I do have is stories and the love for stories. So, just one time after Sesshin, I just felt like this is my way of giving.
Yeah, and that is so true. What you're doing is not only helping support your Sangha, your community, but this is for you a practice of generosity. You're giving back, and that's one of the things that I really like to see and encourage. It's one of the reasons I like doing interviews like this for the podcast, is demonstrating ways in which people are helping, ways in which people are constructing and building a better society,
right.
and helping foster that. So I really appreciate it.
Right. Well, I just want to make it really clear also that 100% of the proceeds from this CD are going to the Zendo. And the purpose of it specifically is we have a lot of members. Well, we're a small Zendo, first of all, but there's many of us who are in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s. So we're age, and we have younger members too. But what our vision is to make some money, just to have another structure on the Zendo on the property there, so that if someone gets ill, and I've seen this during Sesshin, someone gets ill and there wasn't really a place where we could take care of them very well on our on our little property. So the money is to raise, the vision right now is to get a structure, maybe as simple as a yurt, where somebody could be comfortable during Sesshin if they're not feeling well and they need to get out at the Zendo. But still feel a part, or not feel, but still be a part and still practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a laudable goal. And I like the way that you're approaching the way in which you can contribute. I sympathize greatly with the idea of not having any carpentry skills or the other ways to contribute.
Yeah.
Totally get that. But you've found something that you can do, and you do well. And I'd like to mention to folks who are listening that Izzi was kind enough to send me a sample from the CD. So I have heard one of the stories from it, and it really is. You have on the web page that this is for children of all ages, and that's very true. It was a lot of fun to listen to it. Let's talk for a few minutes about what you have on the CD. These really are from across the world. You have stories from Burma, Mongolia, Java, China. Tell us about the stories and what those stories are first, and then we'll get into the music and the other talents that have contributed to this.
Sure. Well, first, I just, before I go any further, it wasn't just me. It was my inception, but my conception. But then I talked to the other people in the Sangha. One man, Gary Parks, a fantastic musician. He created a musical score for the entire CD, just an original musical score that I was blown away by. I knew he was a great guitarist, but when he created this symphonic score, it was more than I had ever dreamed of. And then I've done a number of CDs, storytelling CDs on my own, but 7 or 6 other people volunteered to be the voices of it. So I got the stories and I rewrote the stories and we enacted them. And then another one of the Sangam members did all the audio work for us. So that's just the background. I just want to give everybody, everyone who helped and participated, a lot of credit, because it wasn't just me. And then as far as the stories, the way I see it is that the Dharma is like a culture. So it wasn't just in India, and it wasn't just in China, it wasn't just in Japan, but a culture that went all the way, all around all these different countries in Asia. And now we are part of that culture. So I feel like just as we're part of the culture of America, my family's only been here for one generation before me, and I am part of this culture, and I learn and love our culture that we share. So when I look at these Buddhist stories, I don't look at them as foreign stories necessarily. I mean, maybe, they're folk tales in the sense that it happened over there in this country or that country. But what I really feel is there's an essence, and that essence is part of the culture that we, as American, European, Western Buddhists, we are part of that culture, and I think we're beginning to take some responsibility for being part of that culture. So I want my grandson to hear these stories. I want him to feel. I want him to know that, well, he is part of that culture, because what my daughter is, the way she's treating him, the way she's taking care of him, the way she's raising him, is part of the way I've raised her, and that is part of and the way I raised her is a reflection of my relationship with the Dharma. So those stories to me are not alien, and they're not, they are our stories.
They are, and I think that's one of the important things about this and about the Dharma, is that it's a human thing. It is not specifically and only restricted to Buddhists. So when we say these are traditional Buddhist stories, that is their background, but they are things that apply to everybody.
Absolutely. Like I said, here we are, we're Americans, and then we're Buddhists, but on the wider scale, the Dharma, to me, it's wider than, it encompasses everything, of course.
So Izzi, let's talk for a few minutes about what are some of the things that you ran into as you were designing this and writing it and working on the overall project,
Sure.
and with your collaborators on it. What were some of the challenges that you ran into as you're putting it together?
Well, I'd say the biggest challenge was the way that Buddhist stories have been represented in the West. Usually, well, we only started hearing Buddhist stories in the West probably, around 100 years ago. And when we read the books that were written 100 years ago, they're almost Victorian English. And then what we started to get, as more people became interested in studying Buddhism, we began to get dissertations, and we began to get people who were telling us about the stories, but telling us more as scholars and not as storytellers. So my challenge is I looked all around, and I found almost none. There was one that I know, but basically no audio and very little written. Well, let me just stay with audio. No audio versions of these stories that's in lyrical English and written and performed by people with a Western background, serious Buddhist students who wanted to present something with a rich spirit. So what I found, besides, like I said, the scholarly work and there was a scholarly work and then the work that was like Victorian in its nature. What I also found was silly, almost like Disneyfied Buddhist stories. And I don't want my grandson to grow up with that either. And I don't want to tell tales like that. So that was our challenge, was to give it a heart and soul. Actually, in the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish tradition of storytelling, there's something called Agada. And Agada means that every generation has the absolute responsibility to retell the stories in a way that their generation will understand. It's a responsibility. And so that's, taking that model, I felt like it was, I would take on that responsibility to retell the stories, not how people told it exactly in Burma or in China or in Mongolia, but how my heart relates to the story and what I feel is the jewel nested in the relationships in the story.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us about some of the most rewarding things that you've run into. Of course, there's got to be this sense of accomplishment, as you were just describing, what a great joy it was to be able to work on such a project, and that responsibility and putting these stories from cultures not your own, from the perspective of your culture as a storyteller, and of course working with your colleagues on this. What did you find most rewarding about it? What were some things that came up?
Well, I not long ago told one of the stories. This is one of my favorite stories on the CD. It's called "Monkey Equal to Heaven," and it's a folk tale, and it's really, kids just love it. It's about this monkey who is the most powerful being on the earth, and how this monkey has this encounter with Buddha. And in the very end, not to tell the whole story now, but in the very end, the Buddha confronts the monkey. And when I was writing the story, I read probably 5 or 6 different versions of it. When I read the story, I actually ignored what all of the story said. What I went to exactly was, what does the it's difficult to put this into words, but what does the Dharma say to me? So the Dharma meaning the Buddha, and me meaning the monkey. What is the most important thing that the Dharma is saying to me? And then I just translated that into the story. And the most important thing that the Dharma says to me is, sit, monkey, sit, and attack your ignorance like you once attacked your enemies. So, for me, it's like, to me, that's what happens with a great story, is not only is it a story that you tell to other people, but it's a story that reminds you of the truth every time you tell it.
And I wanted to thank you and the folks that you worked with on this for conveying those messages, because we don't always get those in our culture. We see them as books, or there's text. Yes, that's very true, but we don't see the performance. We don't always see the art in our stories, and that's a much more rich vehicle for that communication.
I agree with you, and I'm thrilled. We're such a little teeny CD, but we've just put so much love into that CD. I'm just thrilled by it, because I feel like it stands on its own as a representative of us at this amazing time. I can say we people who are walking this Buddha way at this amazing time. It's our representation of that. And that we can share with our children. It's not just in the lecture hall or in the meditation hall. It's bringing it really to a new medium in our era.
Mm-hmm. It is, and we need to see more and more of those opportunities of ways we can share that with one another to make sure that they're not lost, because storytelling itself is not as well known as it has been, and I liken it to the lack of awareness that, say, modern Japanese culture has around the Japanese flute, the shakuhachi, which is the music that I have on this podcast, and many people in their own culture that came up with this wonderful and magnificent instrument haven't heard it live and don't know the richness of it. So again, I thank you for sharing this art with us. And I wanted to ask, Izzi, what are some of the other things that you're working on?
Well, I'm doing a lot of juggling. I'm a professional juggler, so for me it's a daily practice to juggle, and I have certain juggling tricks that I've been working on for years, and other ones that now I'm 56, they're kind of like settling in, like, oh, I always wanted to do this trick. Here it is. So I mean, on like a microcosmic scale, I'm enjoying juggling more than ever, and then I take my little I'm called the Little Giant Theater, and it's just me. I'm the Little Giant Theater, and I go to festivals and fairs and schools, and I perform with different themes, and I'm also working with for the first time, it's really just an incredible joy. There's a young man that I taught how to juggle when he was 8 years old, and now he's 28. And we've joined forces, and we're called Locomotion Circus, and we're doing shows together as well. And we're kind of learning together. I've always been a solo juggler and a solo performer, but in this past year, this young man has really come in, a year and a half, really come into my life. And we have a website, www.locomotioncircus.com, and we've got some really we're going to Burning Man. Me and this young man, in just a couple of weeks, we'll be performing as the big guy Burns in Nevada. We'll be there in front of him, juggling fire.
Excellent. Glad to hear it, and I'm glad you mentioned that website. I thought I'd list a few others for people who are interested
please.
in finding out more. We've got locomotioncircus.com. We've also got Izzi, your own website, IzziTooinsky.com. That's IzziTooinsky.com. And of course, what we've been talking about today, the name of the CD itself is Stories from a Wooden Bowl. And the website for that is woodenbowlbuddhiststories.com. Our guest today has been Izzi Tooinsky. Izzi, thank you very much for being here. Happy storytelling and happy juggling.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.